If you did not grow up around Appalachia, it is easy to look at the food and think you understand it too quickly. You see beans and call it bean soup. Locals hear that and know you have already missed the point. You see a pepperoni roll and think it must be a pizza roll. It is not. You hear salt-rising bread and assume it tastes salty. It does not. You hear chocolate gravy and think somebody is joking. They are not joking at all. That is the thing about Appalachian food. From the outside, it can look plain. From the inside, every dish is tied to a place, a season, a job, a garden, a church table, a coal camp, a family story, or a way of getting through winter with what the mountains gave you. Appalachia is not one state, and it is not one single table. Food in West Virginia is not always the same as food in western North Carolina, eastern Kentucky, southwest Virginia, East Tennessee, or North Georgia. But across the region, certain dishes carry a meaning outsiders often miss. These are 15 Appalachian foods outsiders always get wrong.
And getting them wrong does not always mean insulting them. Sometimes it means thinking the dish is simpler than it is. Sometimes it means treating a local food like a joke because the name sounds odd. Sometimes it means missing the difference between something born in a restaurant and something born from a garden, a coal camp, a smokehouse, a spring hillside, or a grandmother's stove. So this is not a list of strange foods. It is a map of foods that make more sense when you know the place. Number 15. Pawpaws. Outsiders often hear pawpaw and think it must be some tropical fruit that wandered into a mountain story by mistake. But pawpaws are native. In fact, the pawpaw is often called the largest edible fruit native to North America. It grows in parts of the eastern United States, including West Virginia and Kentucky, often near creeks and riverbanks. The fruit has a soft, custard-like flesh and a flavor people compare to banana, mango, and pineapple. That tropical taste is exactly what confuses people. How can something that tastes like that belong in the Appalachian woods? But it does. Pawpaws were eaten by indigenous peoples long before European settlers arrived, and later became part of the rural folk diet in places where people knew when the fruit was ready and where the trees grew. The reason many outsiders do not know pawpaws is simple. They bruise easily and do not travel like apples. You are more likely to meet one from a neighbor, a farmer's market, a festival, or a tree someone remembers from childhood. Pawpaws are not an import. They are a native fruit hiding in plain sight. Number 14. Ramps. Ramps are not just trendy little onions for expensive restaurant menus. They are wild leeks, one of the first strong green things to come up in the Appalachian spring. In West Virginia and across parts of the mountains, ramps were a sign that winter was finally loosening its grip. After months of stored food, dried beans, pork, cornmeal, and root vegetables, a sharp green allium from the woods tasted like the season had changed. In West Virginia, ramps have long been treated as a spring culinary treat, and ramp feeds have been held in small communities for generations. Richwood, West Virginia, has hosted its Feast of the Rampson since 1938. The smell is part of the reputation. Ramps are bold, somewhere between onion and garlic, with enough force to announce themselves before they reach the table. Outsiders sometimes treat that smell as the whole story, but locals know ramps are about timing, woods knowledge, and a kind of spring hunger. To get ramps right, you have to understand that they are not just an ingredient. They are a season. Number 13. Chow-chow. Chow-chow is not the dog. On an Appalachian table, chow-chow is a relish, usually tangy, pickled, and made from whatever the garden had left to give. Cabbage, green tomatoes, peppers, onions, beans, cauliflower, corn, or other odds and ends could all end up in the jar depending on the family and the region. The James Beard Foundation describes chow-chow as popular in places including Pennsylvania, Appalachia, the American Southwest, and the South. In Appalachian food writing, it often appears beside soup beans and cornbread, adding acid, crunch, sweetness, and heat to a simple plate. That is what outsiders miss. Chow-chow is not decoration. It is preservation turned into flavor. A bowl of beans can be soft and earthy. Cornbread can be dry and crumbly. Fried potatoes can be rich. Chow-chow cuts through all of that. One spoonful wakes up the plate. It also tells you something about mountain cooking. Nothing useful was supposed to be wasted. The end of the garden did not mean the end of flavor. It meant canning jars, vinegar, spices, and shelves ready for winter. Number 12. Leather britches. Leather britches are not pants on the supper table. They are dried green beans, also called shuck beans in some places. Before freezers and modern refrigeration were common, Appalachian families preserved green beans by stringing them on thread and hanging them to dry. Once dried, the beans shriveled until they looked a little like old leather. That is where the name comes from. In mountain museums, older dialect records, and family memory, leather britches are green beans dried on strings, stored until needed, then rehydrated and slow cooked, often with meat. The term has been recorded for more than a century, especially in southern Appalachian speech. Outsiders sometimes see dried beans and wonder why anyone would go through the trouble. But the answer is winter. Leather britches preserved the garden without jars, electricity, or a freezer. When cooked slowly, they developed a deep, concentrated flavor very different from fresh green beans. They were not a poor substitute. They were their own thing. To understand leather britches, you have to understand a pantry built for cold months.
Number 11. Apple butter. Apple butter is not butter. It is apples cooked down slowly until they become dark, thick, spiced, and spreadable. In Appalachian communities, apple butter was never only about the jar. It was also about the making. North Carolina historic sites describe apple butter frolics as major social events, where people gathered around big copper kettles, told stories, sang, stirred, and worked together. East Tennessee State University's Archives of Appalachia has also treated apple butter as a foodway tied to culture and identity in the region. That is the part a supermarket jar cannot fully explain. Apple butter came from abundance and patience. When apples were plentiful, families had to preserve them. Drying was one way. Cider was another. Apple butter turned fruit into something that could carry autumn into winter. Spread on biscuits, toast, salt-rising bread, or cornbread, it tasted like apples changed by smoke, spice, and time. Outsiders may think it is just sweet applesauce. Mountain families know it as work, season, memory, and a spoon dragged through a dark jar. Number 10. Fried apple pies. Fried apple pies are not just little fast food turnovers. In mountain food memory, they belong to home kitchens, church tables, homecomings, family reunions, and the long habit of preserving apples. In West Virginia foodways, fried apple pies appear among the favorite foods served at dinner on the grounds, homecomings, family reunions, and holiday gatherings. The filling often came from dried apples or cooked down apples, sweetened and spiced. The dough was folded around it and fried until the outside turned blistered, crisp, and golden. A good fried apple pie could be held in the hand, packed for later, or eaten warm enough to burn the tongue if you were impatient. What outsiders miss is the connection to preservation. Apples were mountain food because orchards mattered. Dried apples could wait through winter. When they came back to life inside a fried pie, they carried the taste of the previous season. This was not a novelty dessert. It was a way of making something portable, sweet, and useful from what the household already knew how to save. By now, you can see one of the rules of Appalachian food: the old dishes often start with preservation. Dry the apples. Dry the beans. Pickle the garden. Cook the apples down. Save the crop in a form that can wait. Outsiders sometimes look at these foods and see only scarcity. But preservation is not just scarcity. It is planning. It is seasonal intelligence. It is knowing that the food on the table in February was decided back in August, September, and October. Number 9. Apple stack cake. Apple stack cake is not just a tall layer cake. It is one of the most symbolic desserts in Southern Appalachian food. Classic versions are built from layers of cookie-like dough with a sweet, spiced apple filling made from dried apples, apple butter, apple cider, or applesauce, often with 6 to 8 layers. Stack cakes regularly appear in lists of significant regional Appalachian foods. The cake has a lot of lore around it. You may hear that neighbors once brought individual layers to weddings and the number of layers showed how beloved the bride was. That story is powerful, but scholars are careful with it because folklore and food history can blur together. What is not in doubt is the cake's connection to dried apples, patient assembly, and mountain celebration. It does not eat like a frosted birthday cake. The layers need time to soften. The apple filling seeps in. The whole thing becomes dense, spiced, and heavy with memory. Outsiders see height. Locals see patience. Number 8. Buckwheat cakes. Buckwheat cakes are not just pancakes with a different flour. In Preston County, West Virginia, buckwheat became a point of local pride. The Preston County Buckwheat Festival began in Kingwood in 1938 and became one of the state's oldest local festivals. The festival is named for a crop that was once among the county's most important, and volunteers have served thousands of buckwheat cake meals with sausage. Buckwheat itself is hardy. It could grow where other crops struggled, which made it useful in mountain farming. Buckwheat cakes are darker, earthier, and more assertive than ordinary pancakes. They carry a flavor that some people love immediately and others have to grow into. That is what outsiders sometimes miss. Buckwheat cakes are not trying to be fluffy diner pancakes. They come from a different farm logic and a different taste memory. When served with sausage and syrup at a festival, they are not just breakfast. They are a county homecoming on a plate. That is another thing outsiders miss. Some Appalachian foods are not widely known because they stayed local on purpose. They did not need a national chain, a frozen aisle, or a celebrity chef to matter. They mattered because a county, a church, a fire department, a bakery, or a family kept showing up for them year after year. Number 7. Liver mush. Liver mush is not liverwurst, and it is not just mush. It is a regional food especially tied to western North Carolina and the foothills, made from pork liver, other pork parts, cornmeal, and seasoning. It is usually sliced and fried until the edges crisp, then eaten for breakfast or in a sandwich. North Carolina has even recognized Shelby and Marion as official fall and spring liver mush festival communities. In that part of the state, liver mush is remembered as a food that sustained families when times were tough and later became a local celebration. This is not a dish to flatten into all of Appalachia. Plenty of Appalachian people did not grow up with it. But in the places where liver mush belongs, it belongs deeply. Outsiders often get stuck on the name and never make it to the meaning. Liver mush is about thrift, pork culture, German-influenced foodways, local factories, small-town breakfast counters, and the pride of eating something the next county might not understand. That is a very Appalachian kind of food loyalty. Number 6. Chocolate gravy. Chocolate gravy sounds like a prank until someone puts it on a biscuit. It is a sweet, flour-thickened chocolate sauce served warm over biscuits. Food historians connect chocolate gravy with the American South, Appalachia, and the Ozarks. The origins are debated, with theories involving old breakfast chocolate traditions, pantry staples, and resourceful home cooks. But for the people who grew up with it, the origin debate is not the first thing they remember. They remember a skillet. Cocoa, sugar, flour, milk, maybe butter. Biscuits split open. A glossy brown sauce poured over the top. Breakfast suddenly turning into something that felt like dessert. Outsiders assume gravy has to be savory. But in older usage, gravy could simply mean a sauce thickened on the stove. Chocolate gravy makes more sense once you stop thinking of it as meat gravy's cousin and start thinking of it as warm chocolate pudding that knows exactly what a biscuit is for. It is strange only if nobody made it for you. Number 5. Biscuits and sawmill gravy. Biscuits and gravy did not begin as a hotel brunch trend. In Appalachia and the broader South, biscuits and gravy were working food: flour, fat, milk, pork drippings, sausage, and enough calories to carry someone through hard labor. In West Virginia, gravy biscuits were popular long before fast food restaurants took them up. The outsider mistake is thinking the dish is just heavy. It is heavy. But it is heavy for a reason. A biscuit could stretch flour and fat into bread. Gravy could turn pan drippings into a meal. Sausage gravy, sawmill gravy, tomato gravy, or other local gravies could make breakfast feel like survival and comfort at the same time. The biscuit itself mattered too. Not a roll from a tube if you were talking old mountain cooking, but a handmade biscuit with enough structure to split and enough softness to soak up gravy. Biscuits and gravy became famous far beyond Appalachia, but in the mountains, the plate still carries the memory of work. And notice something else: Appalachian food names can fool you. Salt rising bread is not salty. Chocolate gravy is not meat gravy. Leather britches are not clothing. Soup beans are not bean soup. Those names are not marketing. They are local language, and local language is one of the ways a place protects its food. You can read the words and still not understand the table until someone from there explains what the words mean. Number 4. Salt rising bread. Salt rising bread is not salty. That is the first thing outsiders get wrong. It is also not ordinary yeast bread. Salt rising bread is an old Appalachian and early American bread tradition made through an unusual fermentation process, often using a starter based on cornmeal, potatoes, milk, or other ingredients kept warm until it develops the power to raise the dough. Marshall University materials describe it as a bread with roots in places including Kentucky, West Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, Northern Virginia, and North Carolina. Historic markers in West Virginia also preserve the tradition. The flavor is hard to explain if you have never had it: dense, close-crumbed, slightly cheesy, a little funky, and deeply recognizable to people who grew up with it. The name may come from keeping the starter warm in heated salt or from older chemical salts, but salt is not the leavening. That detail matters because it shows how easy it is to misunderstand a food by its name alone. Salt rising bread is one of Appalachia's great nearly lost kitchen skills. You do not just buy the flavor. You inherit the knowledge. Number 3. Pepperoni rolls. A pepperoni roll is not a pizza roll. That may be the most important sentence in West Virginia food. The pepperoni roll is a soft bread roll baked with pepperoni inside. Fairmont baker Joseph Argiro, founder of Country Club Bakery, is widely credited with commercializing it in 1927 after remembering miners eating bread and pepperoni at work. Some accounts are careful to note that home cooks and miners' wives may have made similar food first, but the commercial story centers on Fairmont and the coal fields of north-central West Virginia. The genius is portability. Pepperoni rolls did not need refrigeration for a work shift. They could be carried underground. They could be eaten with one hand. As the pepperoni baked, the oil seeped into the bread, turning a plain roll into something richer. Outsiders often want marinara sauce, melted cheese, or pizza logic. Locals may enjoy variations, but the classic meaning is simpler: bread, pepperoni, labor, immigration, coal, bakery pride, and a food that belongs unmistakably to West Virginia. Number 2. Skillet cornbread. Appalachian cornbread is not yellow cake in disguise. That is the outsider mistake. In many mountain homes, cornbread was everyday bread, especially with beans, greens, fried potatoes, and soups. It was often baked in a hot cast iron skillet, with the batter hitting fat hot enough to make the edges crisp. In Appalachian foodways, soup, beans, and skillet-baked cornbread are tied together so closely that one almost calls for the other. Now, cornbread arguments can get dangerous. Some families add sugar. Some do not. Some use white cornmeal, some yellow. Some make pone, some make muffins, some make a thinner or thicker cake. Appalachia is too big for one rule. But the old mountain idea of cornbread was practical before it was nostalgic. Corn grew well. Meal kept. A skillet could turn it into bread quickly. The crust mattered. The crumb mattered. And with soup, beans, the cornbread was not a side dish so much as half the meal. Outsiders see simple bread. Locals see the plate's foundation. Number 1. Soup, beans, and cornbread. Soup beans are not bean soup. This is the mistake that gives you away fastest. In Appalachian food culture, soup beans usually means dried beans, often pintos, cooked until they become tender and the liquid turns thick and silky. Foodway scholars make a point of saying that soup beans are distinct from bean soup, and that they are traditionally served as a main dish with cornbread, onion, chow-chow, or fresh tomatoes. In West Virginia, a common winter version uses salt pork or ham hock and arrives with skillet-baked cornbread, onions, and maybe buttermilk. It is a simple plate, but simple does not mean shallow. Soup beans carry the logic of the mountain pantry: dried food, long cooking, pork for seasoning, cornbread for substance, relish or onion for bite. They could feed a family. They could wait on the stove. They could be reheated, stretched, personalized, and remembered. Outsiders sometimes reduce them to poverty food. That misses the dignity of the dish and the taste of it. A good pot of soup beans has texture, seasoning, patience, and a gravy of its own. Soup, beans, and cornbread belong at number 1 because they explain the whole table. Appalachian food is often misunderstood because people mistake plainness for emptiness. But plain food can be full of knowledge. It can know when ramps come up in spring. It can know how to dry green beans for winter. It can know which apple makes the best butter, how long a stack cake needs to rest, what a skillet should sound like when cornbread batter hits it, and why a miner needed bread and pepperoni in one hand. These foods are not museum pieces. Many still live in homes, festivals, bakeries, church kitchens, restaurants, and family arguments across the region. They are changing, like all food changes. But the meaning is still there if you know how to listen. So if you grew up with soup beans, pepperoni rolls, ramps, pawpaws, chocolate gravy, salt rising bread, liver mush, or apple stack cake, you already know the secret. The rest of the country may look at the plate and see something simple. Appalachia looks at the same plate and sees home. And that is why outsiders keep getting these foods wrong. They are reading the menu without knowing the weather, the work, the garden, the coal seam, the orchard, the hollow, the county fair, or the person who first handed that plate across the table.